Hey everybody, it is time now for our NHL Q&A video, my first one of this season, where I will be answering your NHL related questions. And as always, I want to say thank you to all of you who asked questions on the community tab post, and I chose 5 that I'll be answering here today. If you don't get your question answered, be on the lookout. I do these videos throughout the NHL season, so you can get a future question answered down the road. Before we get into it and into the questions and answers, this video is brought to you by Pirani's Hockey World. Pirani's has a huge selection of name brand hockey equipment and apparel. Really has everything that any hockey player could ever need. So if you or someone you know plays hockey, please check out the link down in the description. A huge selection of products, all available at great prices to be shipped right to your door. Pirani's Hockey World, again, link down in the description. But let's get into it here, starting with question number 1. This comes from Eddie, who asks, do you see any NHL team getting over 115 points this year and anybody getting less than 50 points? So thank you for the question, Eddie. Great question here. Last season, the Florida Panthers won the President's Trophy with 122 points on the year. So obviously last year, there were teams that got over 115. Actually, there were multiple teams that got over 115 last year, and I think that is going to happen again, especially with some of these teams that are off to really good starts. You've got the Boston Bruins and New Jersey Devils with 19 wins already on the year. You know, they're pushing 40 points, and we're only a quarter of the way into the season. You've got Vegas off to a very good start as well, pushing up near 40 points. So with these teams that have gotten off to really good starts, even if they don't keep up playing at this level, as long as they remain solid for the rest of the season, I think we are absolutely going to see at least one, probably at least 2 or 3 teams cross over that 115 point mark. And there certainly, I believe, will be a 115, even 120 point team again this year. As far as anybody getting less than 50 points, I honestly don't think so, because a lot of the teams that we thought were going to be really bad, like Arizona, Chicago, Philadelphia, teams like that, really weren't as bad out of the gate as a lot of us thought they were going to be, and piled up some wins early. And I think that little bit of cushion that they've gotten from early season wins may be enough to get them at least over the 50-point mark. Now, those teams all have come back down to earth. Anaheim's had a really bad start to the year. You know, there are some teams that are not playing very well and not winning a lot of games, but I think that enough of those bad teams have given themselves a little bit of a cushion with some early season wins that they're probably going to get to at least 50 points, and I don't think anybody has less than 50 this season. Question number 2 comes from the Bike Watcher, who asks, will Boston end the season with the curse of the President's Trophy? Well, that's a great question. Boston right now tied with New Jersey for the most wins in the NHL. However, the Bruins have played one last game, so they've got the game in hand. They are technically number 1 overall in the league right now. There's going to be bumps in the road. There's nobody that's going to play perfectly through a full 82-game season. The Bruins have had just about as perfect of a start to the season as you could have asked for. I mean, what are they, 19-3 to start the year? Just absolutely insane. But there's going to be some bumps in the road. There are some other teams that are in contention. New Jersey's right there with Boston at 19 wins. Vegas has won a lot of games already. You know, teams like Dallas and Winnipeg are playing really well. Colorado is starting to get things going. Toronto's had a good start to the year overall. So really, you know, there's a lot of teams in contention still for the President's Trophy. We're only about a quarter of the way into the season. There's 60-plus games to go for most teams in the NHL. That's a lot of hockey left to be played. So right now, Boston looks fantastic. They certainly are in line right now to be the President's Trophy winner and to be the favorite to win the President's Trophy. But there's still a lot of time left. There's a lot of season left. Things can change. Teams can get hot. Other teams can get cold. And at the end of the day, I do think there's a decent number of teams still near the top that it can win the President's Trophy this year. But Boston right now, definitely the team that's come out of the gate really, really strong and is in serious contention to win it. I hope they don't as a Bruins fan, because I don't want them to lose in the playoffs, but it might be the Bruins' curse this year if they are able to keep playing the way that they have and win that President's Trophy. Question number 3 comes from Jeremiah, who says, who are the biggest disappointments in your mind this season? What players and why? So obviously I could go through the roster of every NHL team and pick out disappointing players, but I immediately thought of goaltenders when I read this question, and I have 3 of them that I want to talk about. One being Jacob Markstrom with the Calgary Flames. A lot has been made about Calgary's slow start to the season. Obviously, they made some major changes in the offseason, losing Johnny Gaudreau, the Matthew Tkachuk trade, bringing in Nazem Kadri. It's just a lot of change in Calgary. But Jacob Markstrom has not been good. And all of those changes and everything that you can look at on this side, you also need to look back at the goaltender. And Jacob Markstrom has not been good. This is a guy that was in contention for the Vezina Trophy last year, and this season is giving up over 3 goals a game, has a save percentage under 900. That's just not going to cut it at the NHL level, and certainly not for a playoff level starting goaltender, which Markstrom is expected to be. So Markstrom has been very disappointing for Calgary. Sergei Bobrovsky, very similar situation with Florida. Florida's off to a disappointing start as a team, and Bobrovsky has a lot to do with that. I mean, his save percentage is terrible. His goals against is way too high. And a guy making $10 million a year, he's literally been passed on the depth chart at this point by Spencer Knight. Spencer Knight has been significantly better than Sergei Bobrovsky this season. I think over the course of the year, Knight is going to prove himself to be the better goalie. Bobrovsky continues to be a big problem in Florida. And lastly, Thatcher Demko with the Vancouver Canucks. I thought Vancouver could be a playoff team if Demko was a really solid starter for them this year and was able to solidify himself as a top 10 goalie in the league. Unfortunately, Demko's done the exact opposite. He's also got a sub 900 save percentage, giving up way too many goals. I think his goals against is up near like 4. It's absolutely ridiculous. Demko's been terrible this year. Now, the team in front of him is not very good defensively, so he doesn't get a lot of help there. But nonetheless, Thatcher Demko individually needs to be a heck of a lot better for the Vancouver Canucks. And he's been a major disappointment as well this season. A guy that I was really, really high on going into the year has been exactly the opposite so far this season. Question number 4 comes from Nick, who asks, what players could you possibly see being traded before or at the deadline? This is obviously a big question every year in the NHL. Immediately, your thoughts go to the bottom teams that are kind of out of playoff contention, that are always looking to sell off veteran players for draft picks at the deadline. Chicago's got a few guys. Obviously, the one that's talked about the most is Patrick Kane, and whether or not Patrick Kane's going to get traded. Jonathan Toews in that conversation as well. But even if those two don't get traded, there are still Blackhawks that I think could be. Especially the guys that they brought in this past offseason, Andreas Athanasiou and Max Domi. Both of those guys are exactly the kind of low-cost players that teams are looking for to add depth at the deadline. They're on one-year deals, only making $2 million. They're very tradable contracts, and we saw Domi get traded last year to Carolina. I think we could see him traded at the deadline again this season. Arizona's got a few guys. Jacob Chychrun is obviously the big name there that everyone's talking about, but Shane Gostisbehere is actually playing really well. So Chychrun's asking price is still astronomical. The Coyotes aren't just going to give him away. A team looking to add defensive depth, and in particular an offensive defenseman, could be looking at Shane Gostisbehere potentially at the deadline. He's played well and really resurrected his career with Arizona over the past couple of seasons. And it ended really badly for him in Philly, but he's done well overall with the Coyotes, and anybody looking to add an offensive D-man could be looking at Gostisbehere. And then the Vancouver Canucks is another team I look at. because of their cap situation mostly. They've got the Bo Horvat contract dangling over them, whether or not they're going to be able to re-sign him. It's the final year of his deal. If they don't re-sign Horvat, definitely look for them to trade him at the deadline and at least get some pieces back in return. If they do want to re-sign Horvat, they're going to have to move some money and get a contract out of there, and that brings up a slew of names from the Vancouver standpoint. There's a lot of options for Vancouver as far as tradable players, but the ones that I'm thinking of right away are Connor Garland and Tyler Myers, whether they want to move a D-man or a forward. I think Myers is on a big contract. I think they'd probably have to eat some money on that or throw in a draft pick to make a team take that contract, but Myers is a guy that could potentially get moved, or Connor Garland, exactly the kind of middle six forward that teams are looking for at the trade deadline, especially teams going into for a playoff run. He kind of reminds me of Brandon Hagel, and we saw the haul that Brandon Hagel was able to get Chicago when they traded him to Tampa. I think Garland in a lot of ways is a similar player. They're both kind of smaller guys who play with a big heart and a bit of a chip on their shoulder. They can be physical when they need to be. They like to go to the net. They obviously have some goal scoring ability. I think Garland is a little bit more offensively talented than Hagel, and Hagel is a little bit more physical than Garland, but they're very similar style players. They like to crash the net. They go to the dirty areas. They're energy guys that also have some good offensive touch. And Garland, I definitely think, is going to be potentially moved for the Canucks, especially if they want to re-sign Bo Horvat. And finally, question number 5 comes from Trevor, aka Soul Search Gurus. Says, with the NHL playing a few random regular season games in Europe, is this something that the league will maintain for years to come if the NHL deems it to be successful? Well, yeah, absolutely, because this is not anything new. The NHL has been playing games in Europe now for a long time, even regular season games. Back from 2007 through 2011, they had games over in Europe at the beginning of the season for each of those years, 08, 09, 10, 11. Like that was a regular thing back then. Actually, when the Bruins won the Stanley Cup in 2010, 2011, they actually played the first 2 games of that season over in Europe against the Coyotes, and that was their first 2 games of the year. So this is nothing new for the NHL. They've done this many times over the course of their history. The only thing that really stopped it recently was the pandemic, because obviously during COVID, they couldn't travel to Europe and have games there. So that's why there were no European games for the past couple of seasons. But they started up again in 2017 with the Global Series and had European games in 2017, 2018, 2019. The pandemic put a short pause on that, but now the NHL is back doing it. They've had their games in Europe already this season, and it certainly is something that I don't think there's any plans to stop, and they're going to continue doing it for the foreseeable future. So the NHL playing regular season games in Europe is nothing new, and certainly seems like it's going to be continuing for at least for the time being in the NHL. And that brings us to the end of our first NHL Q&A video of this season. Thank you again to everybody who asked questions. If you didn't get your question answered, or if you want to ask a question in the future, please be sure to hit that subscribe button. I post about these videos on the community tab, and that's where the questions are asked in the comments of that post that I pick from to put in the video here. So hope you guys enjoyed this one. Thank you all so much for watching. Before you go, please don't forget, like, comment, share, subscribe, follow along with Off the Wall Hockey across social media with our Linktree link in the description. If you'd like to further support the channel, the links to our merchandise store, membership, and donations are down in the description as well. Please keep spreading the word about this channel. Let's keep this thing growing. Thank you guys again so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll talk to you all soon.